The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction. Floating platforms carried delegates from 1,000 different worlds, their bodies shaped by evolution under alien suns. Some had scales that shimmered like liquid metal. Others moved on legs made of light itself. A few existed only as clouds of conscious gas, contained in shimmering force fields. Ambassador HFY of the Silurian Collective stood at the central podium. Her forearms moved gracefully as she activated the holographic display. The image of a small blue planet appeared above the assembly, rotating slowly in the artificial light. "Earth," she announced. "Homeworld of the species known as humanity. They have submitted an application for interstellar travel rights." A murmur passed through the crowd. New species applied for such rights every cycle. Most were approved without much debate. The Galactic Council believed in expansion, in welcoming young civilizations into the greater community of stars. But HFY's face showed no warmth. Her silver eyes narrowed as she pulled up the next display. "Before we vote, the Council must review the species history file. This is standard procedure." She paused. "I must warn the Assembly. What you are about to see is disturbing." The hologram changed. Images began to flow across the Great Hall, projected so large that even delegates on the farthest platforms could see every detail. War. Endless war. Humans killing humans with stones, with swords, with bombs that turned entire cities to ash. The delegates watched in silence as the death toll climbed into the hundreds of millions. Disease. Plagues that swept across continents, leaving mountains of corpses in their wake. Children dying in their mothers' arms. Entire populations reduced to nothing. Famine. Humans starving while others threw away food. Bodies piled in streets while the wealthy looked away. Genocide. The deliberate destruction of entire groups, simply because they were different. Gas chambers. Mass graves. Killing fields that stretched to the horizon. The images kept coming. Natural disasters. Economic collapse. Environmental destruction. Self-inflicted wounds that would have ended any other species 1,000 times over. When the display finally stopped, the Great Hall was silent. Several delegates had turned away, unable to watch. A Molvari researcher near the back had begun to weep, her tears floating upward in the low gravity. HFY let the silence stretch before she spoke again. "The human species has existed for approximately 300,000 of their years. In that time, they have experienced more suffering than any civilization in our records. They have come close to extinction at least 6 times. They have done terrible things to their own kind and to their world." She looked out at the assembly with something like pity in her eyes. "The analysis is clear. Humanity is what we classify as a self-terminating species. They are on a path toward destruction that cannot be altered. Giving them access to faster-than-light travel would only spread their chaos to other worlds." The vote was unanimous. Humanity's application was denied. As the delegates began to disperse, a young Molvari archivist named Telis remained at her station. Her job was to file the records, to organize the data for future reference. It was boring work, usually, but something about the human file troubled her. She pulled up the historical records again and began to scroll through them more carefully. The suffering was there, just as HFY had shown. War after war. Disaster after disaster. But there was something else, too. Something the ambassador had not mentioned. After every catastrophe, there was a resurgence. After the Great Plagues, human population had grown larger than before. After their world wars, they have built international organizations to prevent future conflicts. After each famine, they had developed new ways to grow food. After each genocide, they had created memorials and sworn to never forget. Telis frowned at her screen. This pattern did not match the self-terminating model. Species on that path showed steady decline, not recovery. They gave up. They stopped trying. They accepted their fate. Humans did not seem to accept anything. She flagged the anomaly and sent it to her superiors. The response came back within minutes. Your observation has been noted and dismissed. The pattern you describe is simply delayed self-termination. Despair destroys. This is a universal constant. The humans will fall like all the others. Tellys was not convinced, but she was young and her rank was low. She filed the records as instructed and tried to forget about the strange species on the small blue planet. 3 cycles later, a Silurian probe crashed on Earth. It was damaged beyond repair. Its technology scattered across a remote desert. The Council classified it as lost and moved on. What they did not know was that humans had found the wreckage. Within one of their years, they had reverse-engineered the faster-than-light drive. Within 2 years, they had built their own. Within 3 years, they were standing at the doors of the Galactic Council, asking to be let in. Kethvari received the news in her private chambers. She read the report 3 times before she believed it. The humans had not waited for permission. They had not accepted the Council's judgment. They had simply found another way. For the first time in her long career, Ambassador Kethvari felt something she did not recognize. It was not fear exactly. It was closer to the feeling one might have when looking at a storm on the horizon. Something vast was coming. Something that did not follow the rules. She thought about the images she had shown the Council. All that suffering. All that death. And still the humans had climbed out of the darkness. Perhaps she thought we asked the wrong question. We asked how they were still alive. We should have asked what surviving cost them and what it taught them. The Molvari research vessel descended through Earth's atmosphere on a gray morning. Dr. Venn pressed her face against the viewing port, watching the clouds part to reveal the planet below. She had studied hundreds of species across the galaxy, but none had confused her quite like this one. The Galactic Council had finally granted humanity provisional membership. They had no choice after the humans arrived at their doorstep with ships they had built themselves. But the Council wanted answers. How had a self-terminating species survived? What made them different? Dr. Venn had been sent to find out. Her team landed near a human city called Berlin. The name meant nothing to her, but her human guide seemed to find it significant. He was a tall man named Marcus, with lines on his face that suggested he had lived through difficult times. Why here? Dr. Venn asked as they walked through the streets. Why this city? Marcus smiled in that strange way humans did, where the expression seemed to contain multiple emotions at once. Because this city knows something about rising from the ashes. It was divided for decades. A wall ran right through its heart. Families were separated. People were shot trying to cross from one side to the other. Dr. Venn activated her recording device. And now? Now the wall is gone. The city is whole again. We kept pieces of it, though, as reminders. They stopped in front of a section of concrete covered in colorful paintings. Humans walked past without paying much attention, as if this monument to suffering was simply part of their daily landscape. You keep reminders of your pain, Dr. Venn observed. Why? Other species try to forget their traumas. Marcus thought about this for a moment. Maybe because forgetting would be a betrayal. People suffered here. People died. If we forget them, it's like their suffering meant nothing. But if we remember, if we learn from it, then maybe their pain becomes part of something larger, something useful. Dr. Venn wrote this down. Though she did not fully understand it, over the following weeks, her team traveled across Earth. They visited hospitals where humans laughed even as they faced death. They attended funerals where people shared happy memories and ate food together. They watched humans play music that was somehow both sad and joyful at the same time, in a place called New Orleans. They witnessed humans dancing in the streets after a devastating storm had destroyed much of their city. The buildings were still ruined. The water had barely receded. But the humans danced anyway. "This makes no sense," one of Dr. Ven's assistants said. "Their homes are gone. Their possessions are destroyed. According to every psychological model we have, they should be in deep despair. But they were not in despair. They were alive in a way that seemed to defy all logic." Dr. Ven requested permission to conduct individual interviews. She wanted to understand this phenomenon at a personal level. The council approved, and she began meeting with humans who had experienced significant trauma. Her most important interview was with a woman named Sarah. She was a soldier who had lost both legs in a war. She now moved using mechanical replacements, and she seemed entirely comfortable with them. "Can you tell me about the worst day of your life?" Dr. Ven asked, her recording device humming softly. Sarah nodded. "I was 23. My vehicle hit an explosive device. I woke up in a hospital with no legs and no idea if my friends had survived. For about a month, I wanted to die. I saw no point in living. Everything I had planned for my life seemed impossible now. What changed?" Sarah leaned forward. "I met a kid in the hospital. She was maybe 8 years old. She'd been born without the ability to walk. Never had legs that worked. And she was the happiest person I'd ever met. She told me something I'll never forget. She said that life isn't about what you have. It's about what you do with what's left." Dr. Ven felt something shift in her understanding. "And that helped you?" "It changed everything. I realized I was mourning legs I used to have." She had never had that luxury. But she wasn't sad. She had built her whole life around what she could do, not what she couldn't. So I decided to do the same. Sarah smiled that complex human smile. "Now I've already survived the worst thing that could happen to me. Everything else is just weather." Dr. Ven finished her research 3 months later. A report ran to over 1,000 pages, but its conclusion could be summarized simply. Humans had evolved something impossible. Their bodies produced hormones under stress that increased focus and determination rather than causing collapse. Their minds constructed meaning and purpose from chaos and loss. Their cultures celebrated those who fell to the lowest depths and then climbed back up. For every other species in the galaxy, despair was a terminal condition. It was the point at which the will to live simply stopped. Populations declined. Civilizations crumbled. Extinction followed, but humans had learned to metabolize their despair. They took their suffering and turned it into something else. Art, music, literature, technology, progress. They did not simply endure their pain. They transformed it into fuel. When Dr. Ven presented her findings to the Galactic Council, the chamber fell silent. Ambassador Cathvari read the report 3 times before speaking. "You are telling us," she said slowly, "that humans become stronger when they suffer. That despair makes them more dangerous, not less?" Dr. Ven nodded. "That is exactly what I am telling you. Every tragedy in their history has made them more determined to survive. Every loss has taught them something. They are not a self-terminating species. They are something we have never seen before." She paused, searching for the right words. "They are a species forged in despair, and that has made them unbreakable." The Veth Dominion had conquered 17 species across 3 centuries. Their strategy was perfect because it was simple. First, they shattered infrastructure from orbit. Then, they crushed whatever spirit remained on the ground. Every civilization broke the same way. Hope died, and surrender followed. When they turned their attention to the human colony world called Horizon's Edge, their commanders expected nothing different. Supreme Commander Thrall reviewed the tactical data from his flagship. The colony was home to 2 million humans. They had basic defensive systems, a small militia, and no significant military presence. It would be, he decided, an easy victory. "Begin the bombardment," he ordered. For 12 days, fire rained from the sky. Cities burned. Factories collapsed. Communication towers fell silent. The orbital bombardment was thorough and merciless, designed to destroy not just buildings, but hope itself. On the 13th day, Thrall prepared the standard surrender broadcast. Every species had sent one by this point. The leaders would beg for mercy. The population would offer themselves as slaves. The conquest would be complete. He waited. Nothing came. "Perhaps their communication systems are completely destroyed," one of his officers suggested. Thrall considered this. "Send ground forces. Accept their surrender in person." 10,000 Veth soldiers descended to the surface in dropships. They expected to find refugees huddled in ruins, too broken to resist. What they found instead changed everything. The first wave landed near what had once been the capital city. The buildings were destroyed, yes. The streets were filled with rubble. But the rubble had been arranged. Barriers had been built from broken concrete. Trenches had been carved through the ruins. The humans were waiting. The fighting began before the dropships had fully landed. Humans emerged from the wreckage, armed with weapons that should not have existed. They had salvaged energy cores from destroyed vehicles and turned them into bombs. They had melted down building materials to forge new guns. They had transformed their ruined city into a fortress. Commander Veth lost 300 soldiers in the first hour. He called for reinforcements and adjusted his strategy. More troops landed. Heavier weapons were deployed. The Veth pushed forward, block by block, building by building. But for every meter they gained, they paid in blood. The humans did not fight like a defeated people. They fought with a ferocity that Thrall had never encountered. They set traps in buildings and collapsed them on advancing troops. They attacked supply lines. They struck at night and vanished before dawn. Worse than their tactics was their spirit. Captured, humans did not break under interrogation. Thrall had personally overseen hundreds of such sessions across his career. Every species eventually talked. Every species eventually begged. But the humans did something that confused his interrogators completely. They laughed. One prisoner, a woman with burns covering half her face, was brought before Thrall for questioning. Her name was Commander Elena Vasquez, and she had led the defense of the Eastern District for 3 months. "Your colony is surrounded," Thrall told her. "Your supplies are running low. Your people are dying. Tell me the locations of your remaining strongholds, and I will grant your survivors quick deaths." Elena looked at him with eyes that held no fear. "You don't understand us at all, do you? I understand weakness. I understand suffering. These things break every species." "They broke us too," Elena said. "About 10,000 times throughout our history. Wars, plagues, famines. We've been broken over and over again." She smiled, and there was something terrible in that smile. "But here's what you don't know. We've gotten really good at putting ourselves back together." Thrall struck her across the face. "Your colony will be glass by morning." Elena spat blood onto the floor and laughed. "You think this is rock bottom for us?" "Commander, I've read our history. I know what my ancestors survived. This is nothing. We've been lower than this. We climbed out then." Her eyes met his without flinching. "We'll climb out now." The siege of Horizon's Edge lasted 8 months. The Veth Dominion committed more troops than they had used to conquer entire civilizations. They brought heavier weapons, more ships, better supplies. But the humans refused to die. Every time the Veth thought they had won, the humans found another way to fight. They built tunnels beneath the ruins and moved through them like ghosts. They sent children to carry messages because children could move through spaces adults could not reach. They turned hospitals into command centers and churches into armories. They found hope in the most hopeless places. In the 7th month, something strange happened among the Veth troops. Soldiers began refusing orders. They spoke of a weight that pressed down on them whenever they faced the humans. It was not fear exactly. It was something deeper. A sense that they were fighting something that could not be beaten. Morale collapsed. Desertion rates climbed. The perfect military machine of the Veth Dominion began to crack. Supreme Commander Thrall ordered a retreat on the 243rd day of the siege. He told his superiors that the colony was not worth the cost. He filed reports about tactical miscalculations and resource management failures. But in his private logs, he wrote something different. We did not lose to superior firepower. We did not lose to better tactics. We lost to something I cannot name. The humans call it resolve. They call it hope. They call it the refusal to surrender. He paused in his writing, remembering Elena's face, her burned skin, her bloody smile, her absolute certainty that she would not break. I have conquered 17 species, he continued. I have broken worlds, but I have never faced anything like this. The humans do not fight despite their suffering. They fight because of it. Their pain makes them stronger. Their despair makes them dangerous. He set down his writing instrument and stared out at the stars. I do not know what to call such a species, but I know this much. The Veth Dominion should never have come to Horizon's edge, and we should never return. 50 years had passed since humanity first arrived at the doors of the Galactic Council. In that time, everything had changed. The Great Hall looked much as it always had, with floating platforms carrying delegates from across the galaxy. But now there were humans among them. Human ambassadors, human scientists, human artists and philosophers and traders. They had become part of the galactic community in ways no one could have predicted. Ambassador HFY stood at the central podium for the last time. Her scales had lost their shine with age, and her forearms trembled slightly as she activated the holographic display. This would be her final address before retirement, and she had chosen her subject carefully. Today, she announced, I wish to speak about humanity. A respectful silence fell over the assembly. Everyone knew the story by now. The denial of travel rights, the crashed probe, the humans who had built their own ships and arrived anyway, the siege of Horizon's Edge that had broken the Veth Dominion's reputation forever. But HFY had something else to say. 50 years ago, I stood in this very spot and showed you images of human suffering. I showed you their wars, their plagues, their capacity for cruelty. I told you they were a self-terminating species. I told you they would destroy themselves. She paused, letting the memory settle over the crowd. I was wrong. She pulled up the original footage from that long-ago session. The wars, the famines, the genocide. The delegates watched in uncomfortable silence. I asked the wrong question, HFY continued. I looked at this data and asked how they were still alive. I could not understand how any species could experience such suffering and continue to exist. It seemed impossible. She switched off the old footage and looked out at the assembly with eyes that had seen too much and understood too little. I should have asked a different question. I should have asked what surviving all of this had cost them, and what it had taught them. In the back of the Great Hall, Tellys listened with tears forming in her eyes. She was no longer a junior archivist. She had become the galactic historian, responsible for maintaining the records of all known species. Her observation from 50 years ago had proven correct. Humans did not follow the self-terminating pattern. They followed something else entirely. Humans carry their despair with them always, HFY said. You can see it in their art, You can hear it in their music. You can read it in their literature. They write songs about loss and sing them at celebrations. They build monuments to their darkest moments and visit them on holidays. They tell their children stories about the terrible things their ancestors survived. She gestured to the human delegates scattered throughout the hall. Several of them nodded slowly, recognizing themselves in her words. For most species, this would be a sign of damage, of trauma that cannot be healed. But for humans, it is something else. It is armor. They keep their pain close because it reminds them of what they have already overcome. It reminds them that they are survivors. HFY's voice grew softer. When the Veth Dominion attacked Horizon's Edge, they expected the humans to break. Every other species had broken. Despair destroys. This was supposed to be a universal constant. She shook her head slowly. But the humans did not break. They had already been broken, you see, many times over. And each time, they had rebuilt themselves stronger than before. By the time the Veth arrived, there was nothing left to break. The humans had already survived the worst things that could happen to them. An orbital bombardment was just one more disaster to overcome. In the silence that followed, a human diplomat rose from her platform. Her name was Maria Chun, and she served as Earth's senior representative to the Council. May I speak, Ambassador? HFY nodded. Maria floated her platform to the center of the hall. Everything Ambassador HFY has said is true. We are a species forged in despair. Our history is filled with suffering that would have ended most civilizations. But I want to add something to her observations. She looked around the assembly, meeting the eyes of delegates from dozens of different species. Our despair did not make us cruel. It did not make us conquerors. It made us hopeful, because we know what it feels like to be at the bottom. We know what it feels like to lose everything. And we know that it is possible to climb back up. She pulled up a new display. Images began to flow across the hall. Humans helping each other after disasters. Humans rebuilding destroyed cities. Humans reaching out to former enemies and building peace. This is also who we are, Maria said. We suffer, yes, but we also help. We also heal. We have learned that the only way to survive is together. That the only way to overcome despair is to share the burden. When she finished, the hall remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the delegates began to respond. Not with applause, which was not the custom, but with a soft humming sound that indicated deep respect. HFY took back the podium. Over the past 50 years, something remarkable has happened. Other species have begun to study human philosophy, human art, human music. They come to Earth to learn how a species can face such darkness and emerge into the light. She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she had allowed herself in many years. We invited humanity into our community because we had no choice. They had arrived at our doorstep whether we wanted them or not. But now I believe they were exactly what the galaxy needed. She looked toward the back of the hall, where Telly sat with tears still streaming down her face. Historian Tellys, will you add the final note to humanity's species file? Tellys rose and floated her platform forward. Her hands trembled as she activated her recording device. She thought about the young archivist she had been, flagging an anomaly that no one else wanted to see. She thought about the 50 years of evidence that had proven her right. She cleared her throat and spoke clearly into the record. Species file. Update. Humanity. Previous classification as self-terminating. Species has been removed. New classification. Apex survivors. She paused, choosing her final words with care. They did not survive in spite of despair. They became strong because of it. They learned to transform their suffering into determination, their pain into purpose, their grief into hope. And in doing so, They showed the galaxy that darkness is not the end. It is only the beginning. She lowered her recording device and looked out at the assembly. They have taught us that any species can rise from the ashes, that any civilization can overcome its worst moments, that despair is not a destination but a doorway. In the Great Hall, humans and aliens sat together in silence. Something had shifted. Something had changed. The story of humanity had become the story of what was possible. And in the back of the hall, Telly's added one final line to the record. We feared them once. Now we learn from them. And perhaps, because of them, we might all find the strength to survive whatever darkness lies ahead. The record closed. The session ended. And across the galaxy, a species that had once been dismissed as doomed took its place among the stars. Not in spite of their suffering, because of it.